Hello everybody and welcome to the Worldwide History. Today I'm going to show you a remake of the Nara Dreamland documentary I made. You can still watch the original version, but I decided to try and redo it a bit. I messed up a bunch. Okay, so Nara Dreamland, A Lost Treasure. Part 1, History. Nara Dreamland was founded by Camisa Matsui and opened in 1961. It was based off of Disneyland in the United States. Now, before we continue about Nara Dreamland, a little bit about Kunizu Matsuo. Matsuo was a Japanese businessman and a billionaire. He also worked as a consul for Mexico. He was born in 1899 and died in 1984 at the age of 84. Matsuo originally worked as a kabuki actor who popularized kabuki in Los Angeles in the 1930s. Eventually, though, he would become the president of over 10 companies. What a successful businessman, by the way, including the Japanese Dream Touring Company, and even became, well, as I mentioned, a billionaire. In 1961, he opened Nara Dreamland, and in 1964, he opened Nara Dreamland's sister park, Yokohama Dreamland. Now, of course, back to Nara Dreamland. Matsuo had heard about Disneyland, which had opened several years previously in 1955. He even got to meet Walt Disney and discussed the concept with him. They originally were going to create a Japanese version of Disneyland, a collaboration between Matsuo and Walt Disney, though eventually this idea was scrapped because of arguments over licensing fees. Matsuo decided to set up the park in Nara. It's actually a beautiful place if you look at the picture. Now, of course, just like Disneyland, the park would have several lands. These included Fantasyland, Tomorrowland, well, kind of, Adventureland, and Ancestorland instead of Frontierland. Ancestorland was meant to focus on the cultural history of Japan. In fact, you could ride a variety of boat types along an artificially created kind of body of water, and you would see miniature models of old Japanese structures. There was also recreations of classic Japanese architecture and classic Japanese villages. Sadly, though, this would only last for a short time, as it was later to be demolished and replaced by a water park. It was a typical water park and nothing extraordinary. The park, just like Disneyland, had several similarities. These included, as mentioned, the lands, along with a train station, along with its very own train, which was based off a 19th century train, a castle based off of Sleeping Beauty's castle, a mountain that was very similar to the Matterhorn, which also had its own bobsled-like attraction, or roller coaster, the Jungle Cruise, yes, a version of the Jungle Cruise, a train, as I mentioned, a main street, and also a gondola ride or skyway. It even had a monorail. Unlike Disneyland's, though, this was more of an attraction than a mode of transportation because Disneyland's monorails were not just meant to be attractions, but also a mode of transportation to get around the parks. Now, not all of the rides and attractions were Disney-based. In fact, there were several that actually weren't Disney-based. These included a haunted house attraction, along with a roller coaster which is literally called the Screw Coaster. The Screw Coaster would actually make you loop around in a corkscrew kind of fashion. Yes, it's literally the name. There was also Aska, which, of course, if you know anything about Nara Dreamland, Aska actually has a very weird commercial. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. There's also a ride that would take you through a classical Japanese story. It would take you through Ryugu Palace. This attraction would make you ride in these boats that were designed to look like turtles, which of course you could call it the Ryugu Palace ride or turtle boat. I decided to call it Ryugu Palace. Now, of course, the park was so popular that, in fact, in 1964, Matsuo opened a second park, Yokohama Dreamland. This was Nara Dreamland's sister park. Yokohama Dreamland included several attractions, such as a version of the submarine voyage similar to the one at Disneyland, which I forgot to mention Nara Dreamland also had a version of. It also had a version of the Jungle Cruise, and other than that, it was much less based off of Disney as Nara Dreamland was. The park also had a hotel on site. This was the Hotel Empire, which still stands today and is part of a college. Now, Yokohama Dreamland also had its own monorail. On the left is a picture of one of the original monorail cars. Later years and closure. Now, in 1983, Disney had opened their own Disney park in Japan. This was Tokyo Disneyland. The park really cost the Nara Dreamland to run for its money, as now that an official Disney park was actually in Japan, Nara and Yokohama Dreamland, seemed to have almost no purpose. In 2001, Universal opened Universal Studios Japan in Osaka, and that same year, Disney opened Tokyo Disney Sea. These three parks, this caused Nara Dreamland, yet again, to run for their money. The abandonment. This is probably the most famous phase of the park's existence. Now, sadly, despite all of this fame, the park was sadly demolished through 2016 to, 2017. Now, of course, for 10 years since the park closed in 2006, the park laid abandoned, and the park was mainly given more attention thanks to the internet. Vandals and urban explorers frequented the park, visiting to either document this decaying historical structure or to vandalize it and depict gruesome and just sometimes even eerie scenes. In fact, the park became pretty infamous as a cheap Disney copy. Now, of course, despite all of this, I'd like to tell you all that, in my opinion, Nara Dreamland is not just some Disney copy. In fact, it was actually supposed to be an original. It was the original kind of basis for, Tokyo Disneyland, and even showed just how successful that the theme park industry in Japan actually was. And without that, I don't think any major theme park corporations would really try to, go to Japan because, before then, not many giant theme park, attractions or companies really thought of that, even though there were very few back then. And even into the 1960s and 70s, the park was still successful, even when Disney World was opened. Now, of course, I'm going to show you a little preview. Here's part 2. Alright, so when we get back to the next half of the series of this documentary, we will be showing you the second part. Thank you for watching.